Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of IndieGame Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 272, where we're going to be talking about acting on data insights and attribution. Now, when you're marketing your game, there's lots of information you'll need to process and understand in order to make the right decisions. However, sometimes it can be a challenge to know what information will help you achieve your main objectives. Thankfully, our guest today, Horgervorst of Steam Data Suite, shares the importance of how understanding insights and properly attributing the information to results can lead you to make the right decisions for your game sales and marketing efforts. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And as I mentioned earlier, today we have Oscar from Steam Data Suite. Oscar, how's it going, bud?
It's going well. Hi, nice. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. So, Oscar, I'd love for you to take a moment, introduce yourself, and let us know what exactly it is you do at Steam Data Suite. What is Steam Data Suite? And then take a moment and just share a little bit about yourself and what you do outside of work and some maybe hobbies or fun things that you do.
All right. Let's start out with me then, I guess. Oscar Hogervorst. I'm a Dutch guy, as you may have already heard a little bit from the accent. I'm the CEO for Steam Data Suite. Before this, I used to work in marketing in games and in analytics in games. And from there on, I noticed that there was a very specific need for analytics tools specifically for Steam. So from that point, sort of started helping out companies with that, and eventually that grew into a true product, and that's Steam Data Suite. And ever since we've been focusing and growing the product and focusing more on it. And that's sort of a very short version of my backstory. Stuff I like to do. The obvious hobbies like gaming and watching TV lazily. I also really enjoy stuff like programming. Like I program a lot, and also in my downtime like to sort of find a bit of a challenge in that. Airsoft. I play airsoft sometimes. Not so much now with Corona, but at this time I'm sitting in a room with a few nice replicas on the wall. What is it? I like to go outside, make photos. I have 2 cats and a girlfriend. Not necessarily important in that order, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And board games. That's, I think, every guest you've ever had plays board games.
Nice.
So that goes without saying.
Well,
and then to
go ahead. Keep going.
And then to your second part of your question about Steam Data Suite. So what we do is we help specifically publishers with games on Steam. We have created a App Store optimization tool that covers all different areas of that are related to data and Steam. And are all aimed at helping publishers sell more games on the platform, be more visible, be more successful. And hopefully today I can share a little bit of insights from that and tell a little bit about what we do and what you can do as an indie to think about those things and which of those things are I think important or things you can work on or look at. I think that's the very short version.
Cool. Well, definitely appreciate you sharing a little bit more about what you do, for your company, what, exactly Steam Data Suite is, and, a little bit more about yourself too. And it sounds like you got a lot of fun things to go on in downtime, which is good because we all need some downtime in order to kind of like rejuvenate ourselves and refresh so we can tackle the day and days to come, right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
All right, cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, but I want you to go a little further as we get into the Q box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q box round is simply a series of random questions I prepared for Oscar here. And he's going to give us his quick, short answer unless he really feels that he needs to explain further. So, Oscar, are you ready for the Q box round?
I don't know, but let's do it.
All right, I like that attitude. All right, here we go. If you had a theme song, what song would it be?
If I had a theme song, what song would it be? The first thing that comes to mind is "Oh Well" from Fleetwood Mac. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's
Okay.
an oldie.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. So I think that sums me up quite well.
All right, nice. What's the best piece of advice you have ever been given?
We have a bit of a saying in our family. I used to help out with my dad a lot, and it sort of translates to with a little bit of velocity, you can get anything done. And there's a bit of a joke in that because obviously, physically, that's not how it works always. But yeah, I think it does sort of mean that sometimes you just need to push through a little bit more to get stuff done, and that's definitely something that I think of every once in a while. Yeah.
Nice. I like that one a lot. That's good. And I think it's cute too that there's like the little bit of that inside joke. Well, in some cases, not necessarily the case, but yeah, I could see how that applies to a lot though. So I
Yeah,
like that.
and it actually comes from like my dad had a company where he revised the big industrial bakery ovens, and I helped him out in the summers, moving those things around, and they're like pretty massive machines. And then it was always like, when you had to get through a doorway or over a hump or something like that, this was just a matter of more velocity to get it going, and that's the sort of where it comes from, I guess.
Nice. All right. Now, what was your least favorite food as a child?
I'm a lunch guy, so a lot of the dinner stuff growing up didn't really sit well with me. Specifically, I'm looking at you, cauliflower.
Okay.
Yeah, not my favorite. It's a very Dutch way to serve any type of greens with potatoes and then sort of mash them up on your plate. Yeah, not great. I think since I moved out of the house many years ago, I've never had that type of meal ever again.
That's great. Okay, if you could be any kind of a plant, what would it be?
I would say reed. Like, yeah, I really like birds, and there's always a lot of activity around the reeds along the water line, and yeah, I think they're also known for being flexible. So I guess that coincidentally also applies.
Nice.
But yeah, I think I'd go for that.
I like that. I like that a lot. And you know what? I gotta say, you did really good with these questions. These are completely new, by the way. I've never used these questions before. You are a test
good and bad
subject.
answers.
No, there's no good or bad answers. There's just answers. So no, I just liked them because it's like I really held your feet to the fire on this one because these are brand spanking new. So, but in light of these new questions, I still have to ask you the staple here on the show, which is what game are you playing now?
So my girlfriend, I'm playing the Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga one.
Nice.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's I'm impressed how many collectibles they managed to put in, and yeah, I really enjoyed the Lego Star Wars games before. Really surprised to see like my nephews that are like 8 and 11 back then, solving these puzzles that I couldn't figure out myself without Google. So yeah, it's really nice that they figured out a way to make it, I guess, challenging for everybody.
Oh yeah.
But I also like to play Back for Blood 2. Still play that almost every week. It's sort of a ritual with some friends. We get together and co-op, shoot some zombies. And other than that, just flight sim games. I'm really into that as well. DCS World and Flight Simulator, of course. But I don't have the time for it as much as I would have liked to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great. I mean, definitely some good games there, and nothing like passes the time with good friends and, taking out some zombies, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Oscar, really appreciate your time and answering those questions from the Q box round. But now we're going to go right into the discussion here and our main topic, which is acting on data insights and attribution. So, to kind of kick off this question, I was hoping that you could outline some of the main problems that devs and studio face when they're trying to understand data and information, specifically as it relates to their game's marketing and sales efforts. So, what are some main problems that they come across relating to data?
I think there's one sort of overarching problem that can take many forms. And this is something that I learned doing more like data consultancy before this. Like I mentioned, it's getting the data is quite easy. Storing it is quite easy. Making it, show it up on a screen or in a graph or a table is also very doable. But actually making the translation from the data that you're seeing to what they usually call insights, right? Like something that you can actually make a decision about. That's the hard part. So to be able to do that, you have to have confidence in the data. You have to have the right data. You have to have it summarized and aggregated in a way that fits the type of thing that it is. And yeah, you need to have to do that. You have to have a good understanding of the types of questions that you want to have answered with the data. So that's I think a very specific type of problem that sort of translates to a lot of more smaller problems, I guess, if it's about like specific things that people need to know or specific overviews that they'd like to use or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too that you called out to the confidence and the right data, because I think that one can be a little bit tricky too, right? So let's say, for example, people could, and also backing up a moment there too, I think it's great that you called out like, hey, it's really easy to get this information. I mean, data and information is now pretty accessible in various ways, shapes, or forms. But then it comes down to the confidence in the right data. And sometimes you could probably be confident in data, but it might not be the right. You can be confident, but not be having the right data. I hope I didn't make that confusing, but you can see how that can happen where it's like, for whatever reason, you're sold. You're like, yes, this is really good, helpful information, but if it's not the right information, I mean, and as you see the problem and how properly interpreting this can be very nuanced and go into very different specifics that we're probably going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. But I love that you called that out, is boiling it down to those things, is the being confident in the information and also having the right information too.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's about making decisions. And I think one of the things that we're doing really well is listening to what the actual questions are. We're not just creating something because we know how to put data in a graph or a table. We actually spend a lot of time talking to publishers to understand what the actual questions are that they require answers to, and what the decision-making process looks like, and how we can support that with the data that we generate, collect, summarize, or in any other way are able to show to them.
Yeah, because again, like asking those right questions or knowing what those questions are ultimately what that's the driving force to getting the results or the information that you're looking for to make those right decisions.
Yeah, and data is in that case, data is a big part part of having those discussions. Obviously, it's not the only part. Like, I think in many cases there's obviously for example, an artistic bit of input. There's a practical bit of input from the resources that you have, and there's the part of what can we learn, what can we learn from the data that we have, and that data can come in. It's a bit abstract to talk about it like this, but the data can obviously come in many shapes, ways, or forms, and trying to find relevant stuff in that is important. And a very concrete example is when I still was doing like in-game analytics type of consultancy. I noticed some things that happened with some of my clients, and in some cases they were, for example, tracking a lot of stuff that was happening in the game, a lot of events, like every bullet fired, or every key press. But then if you look at like what questions do you need answered, it usually comes down to much more high-level type of questions. And then you can ask yourself, okay, do I want to invest all this time in translating all this data, interpreting this data, collecting it, setting it up to be processed properly, or even just simply spend time looking at it, if I know that's not the detailed level of adjustments that I can make based on it.
Yeah.
That has to align.
Yeah. Very, very good points too, because sometimes, like they say, the devil's in the details, or we can get lost in the weeds with all this information too. And sometimes it's just about approaching it from that high level to really, better understand ultimately what is it that you're trying to do, and not get lost in these details. And
what I'm saying is, like, you probably want to find the granularity level or the detail level based on what capacity you have to actually do something with the data. Because at the end of the day, it's nice to know every bullet fired or every key press. But if you're a small indie and you don't have the capacity to make that specific type of changes or to make that specific type of conclusions even, then why even bother going that deep anyway? You may want to focus more on, for example, the performance of each level compared to the other ones, and then just seeing, okay, this level needs some tweaking, or we need to create more content, or we should focus on improving the stuff we already have.
Right, because asking those questions can really help with the prioritization of the development, and ultimately making that the best experience possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to back up a little bit, because you brought up a really interesting point that goes into another area that I wanted to discuss with you, which is about, like, hey, look, there's lots of information out there, lots of different types of data and such. So knowing that, I want to dive in a little bit more, in particular, how all this types of information is associated with marketing and sales. So I was wondering if you could give us like a high level breakdown of the different types of information, and then kind of like some examples associated with each type and why it's important.
Yeah, sure. So if we zoom out altogether, I think there's a few levels of a few different areas where data can play a role within a company. I think the highest level would be on a business level. So what are you even focusing on with your company? Is there a specific niche that you feel is a good opportunity? Can you verify that that's indeed the case based on market data? Making pitches for investors, for example, can you back that up with data to have a stronger story there? And just in general, seeing what's going on the platform. What are other companies like myself doing to be successful? And it's that really has its roots in the business side of things. So I think that would be the first sort of main pillar, and I would say that's even above the marketing and sales type of data that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But if we look at that, I think that's can be categorized or sort of subdivided into the data about how you're being represented on a storefront. In our case specifically, we look at Steam. Like, on one end, how visible are you? How often is there a reference to your game visible to people? On the other hand, also like the quality of that, like how successful are you in getting players to go through the whole sales funnel from being, reaching their eyeballs to eventually, I guess, reaching their wallets. So that whole process, like how well equipped are you to go through that? And that goes down to, is your thumbnail enticing? Is your store page interesting, convincing? And yeah, I think something in the middle of those two is about like your game's proposition, which is also a very strong aspect of marketing. Usually, if you have a finished game or a nearly finished game, there's always still some wiggle room in how you position that game, how you actually sort of frame it, I guess you could say. And it's usually a good idea to look a bit at what competitors are doing, like how are they framing their games, what types of words are they using to describe your game mechanic or your theme, to get a bit of an idea of because there's still a little bit of wiggle room between what the game actually is and how you position it on the store. And I think it's a marketing job to sort of figure out which flavor to add to that, that which way to frame the game within what the game actually is, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
No, definitely, and it's a great breakdown, and especially with those examples, because I think sometimes we, or a lot of times we kind of like we break these things down in our own way and not realize how detailed they can actually get, but it's still at a high level. And it's, I mean, that a lot of the stuff can be pretty convoluted too. But so I really liked how you broke those things down, because it gave us a better sense of really understanding what they entailed and the importance of them.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue breaking all that stuff down to like specific reports or specific questions. But I think, yeah, this sort of covers the main bulk of it. And yeah, I think it's good for us as a company. We sometimes just sit down and say, okay, talk with our clients, and then just ask them, like, what are the questions that you have, or the challenges the things that you would like to know to be able to do, to have a more professional business, or to have more success as a business, or to have more success on the marketing department. And yeah, there's also, I would even say, like a sort of a third type of data, and it sort of correlates a bit with the business part, but it's more like operational type of data, and that's just making sure that everything is running smoothly. You can think about like internal reportings, getting getting your CEO to understand what how your games are doing, or just having a red light start blinking whenever your refund rate goes up or something like that.
Right. Yep.
That's all more on an operational level, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I also love how, and I think we're gonna find this to be one of the common themes throughout this episode, is just based on the questions. What are the questions that are being asked, or what are those? How do the questions relate to the main objective or goals? Right? What do those questions look like? And that brings me into another topic too that I wanted to discuss a little bit more, in terms of like, hey, we get it. There's lots of different types of information out there, and as we broke it down, let's say more business related and more marketing and even operational, as it deals with, internal reporting and monitoring. What's a good way, you think, to determine the most important data that should be focused on?
Yeah. That's a tricky one. Because on one end, well, one thing I touched upon a little bit earlier when we were talking about like more in-game analytics, I think that goes for your market data as well, or like the business stuff and the marketing stuff. Like, it doesn't really help you if you know a lot about something you can't change, right? So again, focusing on what you actually can impact, influence, what you have the capacity to follow up on, I think that's a very important aspect. But that still leaves you probably with an enormous amount of possible things to look at or to dive into. And what a very common way of approaching it is to sort of start out at a bit of a higher level, and then just look at, for example, the different steps in the purchase process, or like the client, what do they call it? Sort of the customer journey that a player goes through within Steam, and then figuring out in which steps are you lacking. I think that's a very good point to start. And then when there's more to gain in optimizing your visibility, or there's more to gain in optimizing your store page, or maybe you want to attract more people from outside of Steam, or you want to focus more on your discount promotions or whatever. But I think once you look at the big funnel and you find one area there that's up for that's sort of under par, or scoring not as much as well as it could, then zoom in more on that and figure out how you where that is coming from, or how you can adjust it to improve it. And that's also a way we try to structure the app as well, and we're going to do that a bit more still, but yeah, I think that's a very good way to look at it.
Yeah, and I like that a lot, because I think it kind of like a good approach to it is kind of like a two-pronged approach. And one of them, which you just outlined too, is really understanding what that player's journey is, what that user's journey is like. And then approaching that to, okay, what's your objective, or what's the main question or problem that you're trying to solve? Because then as you're looking at it from those two perspectives, I would, a lot of answers are probably going to start becoming apparent. And also with that approach, with understanding what the player is going through and being empathetic of them as well too, in some cases, again, that's probably revealing a lot more information. Because if we're just focusing, let's say, on one of those elements, it can potentially set us off course a little bit. You'd probably still be in the right area, but you might not be really focused or pinpointed to the area that you really want to address and focus the most attention on.
Yeah, I think the part about the empatheticness, like that's maybe not even the most important reason to do something like that. I think the most important reason for doing something like this is, I know a lot of listeners will have very limited resources in the marketing department, so they have to pick their battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to understand what is the most low-hanging fruit for you to fix, in terms of marketing, or in terms of your business, or the operation stuff, like that's super valuable, because that makes sure that you're focusing the effort or the resources that you have on the thing that will have the most impact on your sales.
Yeah, and that goes back to your point too, in terms of looking at things in which you have the most control over, or whatever, right?
Yeah, and yeah, because that also translates to how much resources it would take you to actually do something like, and some things are just, can't just change them. On Steam, there's the very fortunate situation that there's a lot of stuff to play around with, to optimize the tags that are being used. The store page is very flexible. There's a lot of variables there that you can play around with. The discounts that are always ongoing, of course, and there's tons more stuff for you to sort of figure out to optimize, and that's not necessarily a given in every type of store. So that's what personally for me makes Steam so very interesting. There is a lot to optimize, but it's just a matter of having the type of insights, or also I guess a little bit the attention to it from a business perspective, to wanting to do it and to see the value of something like that. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I'm a little bit curious about too is, I know that sometimes it can be a challenge to view, marketing or even business efforts from a high level, especially if, we're just focusing on one main metric or KPI. Let's, for the sake of argument here, call it wish list, right? So what are some ways that other data and information can present the whole picture more clearly, so we can better understand the marketing efforts and sales information?
Well, It's a bit of a big question, but I think what helps a lot with this is combining different data sources. I think that's a very useful way of getting really basically getting the insights from all the data. So, for example, in Steam Data Suite, we have a feature that's store page optimization, which takes data from Steamworks about sales, which takes data from our crawlers and scrapers that go over every store page on Steam every day to see if anything changed. And it also goes over the Google Analytics of the store page to get the traffic data. And combining that stuff, we're able to show, on this day you changed something on the store page, so let's consider it a new version, and here's how it is performing traffic-wise, sales-wise, wishlist-wise, etc., compared to the previous one. So that's a very powerful type of insight that comes from combining this stuff. And I think the way you summarize or aggregate the data is also a very important part of this. Like, the more high level you want to look at it, the more you probably want to have to summarize it. So yeah, those are the. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, no, I think it's a great example because, I mean, myself personally, in a lot of cases when I'm looking at information, I am hopping back and forth between the two platforms, at least Analytics and Steamworks, because I know the importance of getting that picture. So the fact of seeing it represented differently, and I'm sure outside of Steam Data Suite, there's also a lot of other ways to parse that information too and view it. But regardless,
some publishers do is like they run the exports from Google Analytics and they put the data in their own Google Sheet with together with data from their sales. Like that's definitely something you can do manually. It takes a bit of time, but it's something that can already give you a bit of this information. And I think it becomes more and more valuable the more context you have for the data. So if in a certain week you see a number go up, was that because you had a lot of incoming traffic from outside of Steam? Was that because it happens to be a school holiday? Was it because your game was on a discount or your competitor was failing, or so having that type of context I think is very valuable, but it's also a bit of a pitfall to try and sort of get all of that stuff in there together if you're, especially if you're doing it manually.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
For us it's a bit easier to do it because we can do it structurally and automate it, but I wouldn't try and put all of that in your Google Sheet, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, let's face it too. I mean, you just provided one example, but there are so many other instances in which areas that you can focus on. I mean, there could be like time on page, there could be like specific location. Like, there's any number of other valuable insights that can be gathered. That combining this in a right type of like dashboard or view can be super helpful to kind of paint that whole picture. So no, that definitely answered my question for sure.
Yeah, I think you're doing yourself a very good favor if you're really trying to look at it in a structured way, basically zooming in on the thing you need to know more about or the thing you think you see identify as a problem. So the example that we gave earlier, like you're looking at, for example, the conversion funnel from impressions to store page traffic to sales or wish lists, and then you see, okay, the store page part that is underperforming compared to what other people are how other people have this type of performance, or based on my previous game or something like that. Then you can zoom in on that, and then you can zoom in more and maybe identify that there's indeed like a specific country that is kicking your performance down because there's a few bad reviews, or there's something else going on that's causing that. But to have that sort of structured way of zooming in on the problems, I think it can help a lot, because it's a common mistake to try and start out with something that's already too specific and too detailed, and it can give you a bit of a tunnel vision to maybe sometimes get a bit of a wrong conclusion about what the problem actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just so many ways of how having this information can be super helpful. And again, go back and answer a lot of those questions that you might have in the beginning, whatever those are. So I want to take this in a little bit different direction here, because hey, all these insights and everything are great, but at the end of the day, sometimes getting the results and knowing how those results came about are super important. So I want to talk about some attribution and also taking action on some of these things that we're talking about. So we already, again, there's lots of information that we can get from, all these insights and everything else. But like, what are some ways to better understand and act on that information?
What are some ways to better understand, act on that information? I think, I think having the data being presented in a way that fits the type of data that it is, and again, the type of decision that you're making is the biggest thing, and especially having it again summarized in a way that makes sense. I think that's very important, that you don't have to go through a very lengthy log to read, like to sort of try and comprise a sort of an overview of what's happening, but instead you have like the totals and the averages and stuff like that. I think that's goes for any type of data, and in case of attribution, that's not different. And to make that a bit more concrete, right now we're building on a feature that uses the Steam traffic. What's it called? A traffic and visibility report,
Yep.
and we're actually getting all the source data from that, and we're sort of regrouping and reclassifying the different sources that Steam defines. Because Andrew, you've been in Steamworks quite a lot. You know how messy those things can sometimes get. So we're already trying to sort of clean it up a bit on our end, so we can give a more summarized, more categorized, cleaned up, and maybe sometimes a bit more readable and understandable overview of that type of data. And especially, well, the next step would be to combine it with the rest. But enough for the promo talk. Getting the results and how, sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. Sorry.
That's okay. But having that information and view and just even presented slightly different. I mean, the information could be like, for example, I know one thing that drives me nuts in Steamworks, and I'm not trying to bash them or anything, but all the data there, it seems like to be viewed on a daily level, even if you look at the time span of over a year. So you're seeing lots of little lines. So it doesn't but if it was, and I know Google Analytics presents information this way, but you could look at monthly or weekly data, so you can start seeing little like trends happening in terms of like, hey, overall, is our traffic going up in time? Because if you're just seeing lots of spikes on a daily level, I mean, just simply presenting that information slightly different can make a huge difference. And that's just a very general example.
But it is a very concrete example of exactly what I'm talking about. Like having it summarized, this is a way of aggregation. This is a way of summarizing it, and you gave the perfect example. Like sometimes you cannot identify the long-term trends if you're looking at short-term intervals, and
right.
That's definitely a very concrete example. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I want to know a little bit more too, because, and this goes back to your main point that you were talking about before in terms of having the right data and obviously being confident in that data. So, and we talked a little bit too about player journey. Now, what are some effective ways to like attribute like player activity and the results those players generate to marketing campaign efforts? How can we make sure we're properly attributing that type of activity or just results as a whole to our marketing efforts and everything else?
That's not easy. Sorry. That's
I
the
keep
short
asking
answer.
you loaded questions. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about that. I'm up for it. But technically, there's a few ways to track those type of things, and to give the short summary for somebody who has never really looked much into this. In a more of a basic e-commerce situation, if you have your own web store, you can have a through type of tracking where you can actually track a user moving from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to the thank you page, and you can have the whole picture as one overview. But the practical problem on Steam, as on any other big app store, is you can't do that because you don't own the middle part of that whole system. So instead, you own the part where you advertise, where you buy a link basically to put it somewhere. So you own the link, and then eventually when they show up in the game, you own the game, right? So what we do instead of through tracking is to track around it basically. And that works with a mechanic that's called fingerprinting. It's a probabilistic approach, so it's not as deterministic as the through type of tracking, but it's still very suitable to understand from a player showing up in your game if we recognize them from clicking any of the links before that. And if we do, we can say, okay, then they showed up in the game after clicking a link, so they probably showed up in the game because they clicked the link. And that's a way to do it, and that's a very common practice. For example, in mobile games, there's a few very big companies that do this thing specifically, and we set out to bring a similar type of mechanic to Steam, and it works technically in a very similar way actually.
Okay, and just for people who are, let's say, somewhat familiar with some of the tracking that's available, let's say for UTM parameters that I know Steam rolled out recently within the past year now or whatever, how does that differ from those? Is it more advanced, or is it at least not necessarily more advanced, but does it offer more insight, I guess I should say?
So theoretically, what Steam's trying to do with the UTM tracking is the through tracking. Practically, it's not really working out. There's a lot of challenges from and in talking with people from Valve, they already talked a bit about like these challenges, and I think they translate into the accuracy of the solution. Like you have people that click on a banner and go to the web version of Steam and then open the desktop app of Steam and then continue the journey there. Those environments are completely separated from each other, so it's not possible for them to properly attribute that. From some of our clients, we hear like the accuracy of the UTM tracking being as low as like 5%, and that's rough if you actually want to make some sensible decisions on a big marketing budget. And yeah, the campaign attribution in the way that we do it with the fingerprinting is also far from perfect. I would say it's still only representing a probabilistic approach, so it's not 100% accurate, of course, but it does cover a lot of the cases where the UTM tracking just can't do it, even if Valve wants to sort of help out a little bit with that.
Yeah, but there's always going to be problems in that too, and I think it's important to identify that. However, within those problems, there are going to be solutions that are better than others. There's always going to be some kind of, and it's just simply the nature of the environment, right? Like you could have people search for things on a device, and then that's not attributed because then they go into their, like you said, they could be on a device, they could be on their computer, then they could go into the actual app. So there's so many disconnect points.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think we're doing a pretty good job in that type of matching. We at one point had a lot of experimenting going on to figure out what we would need to do to track stuff properly, and what we had to basically include in that mechanic to make it work. And we figured out a way that is a very healthy balance between being privacy aware for the players, being easy to implement for the developers, and being accurate for the publishers and for the marketeers, I would say. So yeah, and one thing I want to add to that is that leaving the example of like really low accuracy of like the 5% aside, like if you are comparing the performance of different marketing channels and the accuracy of the tracking is pretty similar across the board, then it doesn't really well, it's not as important that it is 100% accurate or 95% accurate. It's more important that you are able to actually still compare the outcome of that.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah, so one example of this is as well, like with the tracking links that we can provide, they can, for example, go to 10, 20, 100 different influencers and ask them to either paid or voluntarily make a video about their game, and then ask them to put the tracking link below the video. Obviously, a big part of the people that watch that video will not click on the link. They will just look it up on Steam directly, or just Google the game and end up on Steam that way. But it's still, if you make the assumption that everybody's audience is equally likely to click on the link, then you still have some measure to say, okay, we got 100 clicks that resulted in an install from influencer A, and we only got 2 from influencer B. Then yeah, next time influencer A could be the best investment of the 2.
See, and I love that you're sharing this, because as you were talking about this, it started me thinking in terms of, I'm sure there's ways that you could be a little bit more structured and strategic with this approach, to the point where it's not so much about getting the accuracy 100% and everything. It's more of, how do I structure, gear this more towards the behavior of things, and then by doing that, I maybe as a team or whatever, we can really get down to a much clearer understanding of how our audience is ultimately going to react, allowing us to, potentially help either predict results or have a better understanding of why people are doing the things they do, and then taking this information and applying it elsewhere. So I really like how you were like phrasing things like that, because it's getting my brain going now, and like, oh, there's a lot of cool things you could be doing with this.
Yeah.
That we probably
This is a regular work day for me, like having my brain go like that. Because there is a lot of awesome things we can do. Like we're trying to fill in some of the blanks that are left from Steamworks, and there's unfortunately a few, but there's so much awesome stuff that we can do with the structure that we have now, with the data that we're collecting now. So yeah, we have a backlog and a roadmap that you wouldn't believe. But yeah, it's so awesome to think about this, and to talk with publishers about like the actual question that we have. And I think, yeah, in terms of the campaign attribution, it's very good example. Like maybe the question you want answered isn't, I want to know exactly how many people bought the game from this channel, but maybe the question is more, I want to know which of the 2 or which of the 10 is worth my money more.
Yeah, exactly. And it starts, again, opening up all those other types of questions that you might not have thought about before, because the information wasn't being shown in a way in which it promoted you to start thinking in a different mindset. So, yeah, love it. So I know we're coming up a little bit on time here, but I wanted to talk briefly about some lessons learned, and in particular, just, from what you've seen and everything, what are some mistakes that people generally make when they're trying to interpret their marketing or sales information?
I think you already pointed out a very important one, and that's sort of missing out some of the context. I think that's the one that we're seeing most.
Okay.
So not fully understanding why something is happening, and don't get me wrong, like why is the hardest question to answer in any data type of setting, but jumping to the conclusion based on seeing only a part of the data or a part of the situation, because you maybe only have access to that part of the data, that's very tricky. And I think that would also lead to the second learning is that it's easy to get sort of focused in or honed in or a little bit lost in one specific source of data. A good example is I know quite a few indies that are really adamant about the reviews that they're getting on their game, and they're reading every single one of them. They're basically determining what the backlog of their development work will be based on the reviews that they're getting. But again, that's quite a one-sided way of looking at it. And maybe if you look at the behavioral data, and this is something that I've seen in practice, like behavioral data can show a very different picture from what people talk about in your reviews. So to not dive too specifically into one corner of the data that's available to you, I think that would be a second type of mistake that sometimes happens.
Yeah, and that information can completely, like that example we provided in a kind of an offset way, can be completely flipped 180 with, like, for example, remember, what was it? Battlefront, EA and Battlefront, or I think Battlefront 2, when they were like micro transacting everything. And if I remember correctly, a lot of the reasons why they were doing that is because all the data pointed to people love buying all these like things and stuff. But then they were missing out on probably other insights where people were just really upset about that because then they felt like they were nickel and diming each other. So it's really interesting dynamic because this stuff can go either way, but still having those insights and those other data points can again paint that whole picture to help you avoid some of these mistakes.
Absolutely, and I think one more mistake to add to the list, and the last one I'm gonna talk about is you have to spend the right amount of time on it.
Yeah.
Right. So especially if we're talking about like getting the data or interpreting the data, like you don't want to get too lost in that. And I've seen some indies in the Netherlands that maybe are like diving into building some of their tooling for themselves, or really go nuts on the spreadsheets. But again, yeah, figure out what works best for you and where you want to use the solution that already exists, or where you want to build something yourself. I think that's also a very common mistake, because it snoops away a lot of hours altogether.
Yeah.
Easily.
No, definitely. It's yeah. It can like kind of be like paralysis and analysis, if you will, I guess. Cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Well, appreciate those insights. And as we close now, I was wondering if you could list like either 3 suggestions or tips that you would recommend to, devs and studios based on our discussion today.
Okay. Let me think about that for 1 second. I think sort of take a moment to consider the role the data plays within your company. I think that will be the first one. Like, it's not something not very obvious to sort of zoom out on a company level, or on a project level, to think, okay, well, what is the role of data? And it doesn't have to be a meeting or whatever, but just think about, like, when are we making the decisions that we can get supported with data, and then find the ways to get the data that you need to make that decisions better. Because in the end of the day, it's about making the better decisions. And
Right.
if it doesn't do that, then you may be looking at the wrong data, or you just maybe don't have that match yet between the learnings that you're gathering and the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, and that's definitely an important one, and to kind of like lead with, because again, that how you think about that question could change in time too, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if your company evolves, then the type of decisions that you're making are also evolving, and especially in like the life cycle of a game developer / publisher. Like, if you're publishing a game, there's quite a bit of time that you may not be thinking about data, or you're more thinking about like in-game analytics, or more like behavioral analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get closer to the release, you're actually starting to look more at like, how are my wish lists doing, how am I visible on the page, etc. So I think that would be my second tip, is to and it's sort of in the same line as the first. It's like, make sure that the type of stuff you're looking at makes sense for the stage that you're in within the life cycle of your company or your product. Do not dive in too deeply, or to stay too shallow in terms of the analysis. Or I think it sort of summarizes the second tip. And I owe you a third one.
Well,
Yeah.
no pressure.
Well, honestly, like, yeah, it's easy for me to say, but honestly, I would really spend a bit of time trying to find the good tooling. And this is not just me promoting myself, but it can indeed make your life a lot easier. Yeah, as a sort of a summary of what we talked about, right? Don't build it yourself unless you actually have to, because your time is probably better spent on creating an awesome game and not necessarily an awesome dashboard.
Right. I mean, of course, because it's like, and who knows? There's any number of reasons. Like if your forte, if your skill set and everything else is really on what you're doing for your project, for your game, then not just from a time and resources perspective, but you might not even be structuring things in the right way that you should be from someone who comes from, let's say, a more analytical background, and someone who is putting together tools together, regardless if it's Steam Data Suite or other tools that are out there. So it's still a good point. Use your skill sets and everything else where they're gonna best serve you.
Exactly, create the most value. Yeah, yeah, and it's there's so many specifics about working with data. I'm not gonna even bore you with all of that, but it's also something that's not necessarily that easy to do right, because there's always corner cases or things to consider, especially if the data where you're getting it from, and in this case that would be Steamworks or Google Analytics. It's not always as clean and as served in a way that's easy to work with as you would have want to. So yeah,
Absolutely.
there's quite a bit of expertise involved in even making that usable and presentable. And yeah, by all means, learn, like, get better at making the games instead of try to get better at that. That would be my advice anyway. Um,
Because
yeah,
again, you'll find yourself probably getting more lost in the details and everything else
yeah.
than you would like to do. So
Yeah, before you know it, you spent maybe 3 weeks of your time on it, and you have a very good setup that maybe is very excellent at answering the questions that you have. But yeah, it did cost you 3 weeks of development time. Is that worth it? Yeah.
yeah, and I'll even end on this because I remember one time I have some background in filmmaking, and I was following this gentleman who is really good at his craft and everything, but he was also doing a lot of courses, and he was at an event one time, and a woman came up to him and said, "So, are you still a filmmaker?" And he goes, "Of course I am." And she's like, "Well, I've seen you do a lot of these courses, though." And then it occurred to him she was absolutely right. He wasn't making films anymore. He was talking about how to make films, and it was a great reality check for him in terms of where his focus is lying. While that was these other endeavors were still important to him, she very sincerely and honestly, without trying to call him out, but did call him out on that. You're not really a filmmaker anymore. So
Yeah.
but
Hey,
anyway.
and Andrew, before you know it, you'll be recognized as a podcast maker.
Right. All right. Well, okay. Maybe things need to change on my end too. That's hilarious. All right. Well, Oscar, really appreciate your time and everything. But before we get going, please, what's a great way to get in touch with you, or a website? If people want to learn more about Steam Data Suite, how do they get to it? Any other information you can share? Website, socials. Give us what you got.
Yeah. Well, just Google Steam Data Suite, steamdatasuite.com. If you go to the website, you can sign up for a demo account, and if you connect your Steamworks, it will automatically be upgraded, and you can use most of the stuff in the data suite for free. And then just check it out. And then I would love to get in touch with some of you, and just to figure out if there's any more ways we can help your business and help you be more successful on Steam. So that's a fairly easy process. Other than that, on LinkedIn, Steam Data Suite, we're also on LinkedIn. And one random shout out, we're also still looking for a programmer, a Python developer. So if you if you have that bit in your skill set, and you're maybe tired of building games but you still want to work in the games industry, then this could be a very nice job opportunity for you. Yeah,
Awesome.
I think that's about it.
All right. Well, everyone, please, if any of what we were talking about sound interesting at all, check out Steam Data Suite. You can, like Oscar said, you can go to the website. If you have any other questions, there's ways that through the website, you can contact them. They're on LinkedIn too. And for any of you who are looking for work and thinks that sounds good, reach out to Oscar on the website too, and I'm sure they'll get in touch with you. So, Oscar, again, thank you so much for the great insight and discussion today on data and attribution, all this. This is all really important stuff. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.